Today, I want to discuss my language learning journey so far, and I'm going to get straight into it. I don't know what day I'm on currently. It's probably day 40 something, probably day 40 something of learning Spanish primarily. However, I've also been practicing my Chinese a lot, uh, a real lot. This is partially due to the fact that I have an HSK 5 exam in the coming couple of months, um, but also because I I mean, this is what I sort of do for fun, and I actually want to get to a level where I'm actually proficient. It's very easy to say that, yeah, like I have a large vocabulary, like a relatively large vocabulary in Chinese. I understand a lot of things, but I can't really say anything, and it really pisses me the fuck off. And so I know that I'm so close, but I feel so far away from achieving any degree of conversational fluency, and that always is bearing on me. It's pissing me off because people are like, "Oh, you speak Chinese?" Yeah, I do, but I sort of don't at the same time. I'm actually pretty shit. But I know that I'm better than most people who learn Chinese. But I'm certainly not someone that you want to rely on when it comes to communicating. So I'm in this really really weird stage. People call it the intermediate phase or whatever. But anyway, obviously it's put me in a position where it's like I really want to improve. I really want to push myself over the line. And I noticed with my Spanish, my new method of Spanish learning, I've started to memorize intensely each and every one of the mini stories, basic little stories that are present on Link, which is a language learning app, which essentially is run by the principle that you can passively sort of accumulate the knowledge right over time and repetition. But I've actually come to a realization that my initial methods of passively learning and casually accumulating all that information is wrong. Not entirely wrong, but basically it's wrong. And if you guys have watched Stephen Kaufman, he's all about this passive learning stuff, really. He doesn't really intensify things too much. I mean, it varies per language that he wants to learn. Obviously, it's going to change depending on the language slightly, but the same principles still apply. It's repeated exposure to vocabulary, and eventually you can use it with enough exposure. But the problem is, here's where the problem lies, right? Because I would agree that that is the way to learn a language if you're a fucking child. And the reason why it works when you're a child is because you have the opportunity of speaking with your parents, right? Because your parents are upbringing you in a comfortable environment, right? Where you can make as many mistakes as you want. And I still stick to my gut. Children are not better at learning languages than adults are. It would make no fucking sense, right? I mean, adults are intellectually superior in every other kind of intellectual endeavor. And some people really resort to the argument, oh, children are better at learning. No, that's not true. But anyway, I'm not going to go into that. What I'm saying is that you, as an adult, do not have the opportunity to speak with your parents or anybody who's going to guide you through a comfortable experience, making the mistakes, the trial and error that it's going to take over fucking however long it takes to learn a language. I mean, by the time you become fluent is like what, when you're a child, it's like probably when you're 7, you start to really, you're really good at speaking. By the time you're 7 years old, for example, right? We don't have that time. We're fucking adults, right? So now here's something that's really interesting because I've been learning Chinese for a year and a half, 2 years now, and I only feel like now I'm really starting to make some progress, right? So with my Spanish learning, just like I outlined before, I've been memorizing. Sorry, the lighting. I've been memorizing the stories, and it has been a tremendous change in the way that I think about learning languages, and it really feels like I'm progressing. And well, let me outline it for you. I pretty much do the same thing every day. I get the story, and I use my brain, and I read over and over and over, and I make sure that I can close my eyes by the end of the day and spit out that story from my brain. Okay, so I'm not reading it like, you know what I mean. I'm doing it completely off heart. I'm memorizing it completely off heart. Okay, here's a bunch of things that I noticed because I did the exact same thing with Chinese because I had a suspicion that it might be effective for my Chinese learning. Now, here's where everyone gets confused. When I was initially learning lists of words, that was not working for me. Okay, everyone says you need a very very large vocabulary in order for you to well, obviously progress in the language, and that's one of the biggest. Obviously, it takes a long time, but it's one of the first steps in terms of on your path to fluency is that you need a very large vocabulary. And so what most people would do, which is completely normal, which is you get a list of vocabulary and try to memorize them all. Okay? But the problem is that yeah, you have vocabulary, but you don't know how to use that vocabulary. And by the time you do know how to use some vocabulary, you forgot most of the vocabulary that you learned in the lists. Okay, by the time you actually start conversating and stuff, you realize you've actually forgot it all, right? So it's an ineffective method. So that led me to believe that, okay, this memorization, this intensity thing is actually not the way to be. So that's why I moved on to this passive learning approach, where it's just sort of you accumulate the knowledge, and yeah, that works, but we don't have all the time in the fucking world. We do not have 7 years, 8 years to get fluent in a language, do we? No, we fucking don't. We want to get fluent by a language within a year. Honestly, like a year is fucking, obviously it's a relatively short period of time, but a year is enough. Okay, you can do a lot in a year if you actually put your head down. So anyway, so ever since I've started fully memorizing, so what you don't do is you memorize the list. You don't do that anymore. But what you do is you memorize fucking stories, exactly what I'm doing, paragraphs, right? Because not only are you getting the words, you're getting the words in context. So at least you have one or two examples where each and every single vocabulary you've learned is actually being used. So you're familiar with the potential words that surround, the other words, right? So you know how to use it. Okay, so you know how to use it. You've memorized where it usually comes up, how you would use it, what words are associated when you want to use that particular word or vocab, and things like that. So that gives you a much larger, a much deeper insight, and it allows you to become a lot more familiar with the language as a whole. So, I couldn't actually recommend this enough. Obviously, it's not easy. In fact, it is fucking hard to memorize a bunch of stuff. I notice actually in Chinese though, because I'm quite familiar with most of the vocabulary, my understanding, my ability to memorize the stories, the mini stories, the easy stories, is a lot easier than Spanish, because my Spanish knowledge is extraordinarily limited, and I only started learning Spanish about a month and a bit ago. So obviously memorizing the Spanish stories is considerably harder. Also, something to consider, Spanish, a lot of the words change, the verb conjunctions and the articles and stuff like that, they all change depending on who's speaking. So if it's they're speaking, you speaking, them speaking, we speaking, she speaking, he speaking, that all changes the verbs, it'll change the articles, it changes a bunch of different stuff. So with that in mind, I know for the Chinese stories, I only have to memorize the first half, okay? Because I know that there's going to be pretty much no changes to the second half of the mini stories. If you guys are familiar with the Link mini stories, it changes the perspective from where you speak it, right? So I only have to memorize half as much work in Chinese, because I know that the grammar actually doesn't change much. All the words are basically the same as in the first and the second story, except instead of he, it's I, right? But in fucking Spanish, you've got ayudan, and then you've got ayudamos, you know what I mean? Estudian, estudiamos. You got all those different little changes, right? And you have to memorize all that. It's really, really important, especially particularly for Spanish. You have to get used to that. Obviously, there is relationships within that, so you'll be able to learn it, and it's actually not as difficult as you might think. Also, I don't want people thinking that I've stopped. I've literally been working as hard as ever to learn these languages. It hasn't been easy. It's been time consuming, but I'm also finding out ways to make it a little bit more efficient. I'm always on my phone. Instead of going on TikTok or whatever the fuck you do, you just go on Link and you just memorize the stories. That's all you do all day. I just go exercise, I come back, memorize stories, and then I go to bed. That's my life. Pretty straightforward. So, yes. So initially when you memorize a story, okay, there's two things I want to comment. Initially when you memorize a story, it's going to go in like the front of your brain. When you memorize something, it's in the front of your brain, it's very easy to lose it, right? So obviously you're going to need to revise that. But what you will find is that once you do memorize a story, yeah, it's at the front of your brain, you can just memorize it, but it's certainly not deep in your subconscious by any means, right? But you'll notice as time passes, this is where the passive learning sort of happens. As time passes, as you get a good night's sleep, as you're going to the gym, that initial memorization starts to sink in to the depths of your brain, and you'll be able to memorize it forever, okay? Those grammatical structures will stay with you. As long as as long as you sort of read over it here and there, and make sure it's in the, you have to initially memorize it though, okay? You can't just expect to read it a few times and then and then it let it sink to the memorization of the subconscious. You have to initially memorize it, which is what I've been doing, and then it sinks to the back of your brain, and I can already feel that happening. Okay, and I've only done it for about a week or so, a week and a half probably, of memorizing every single day. Now, there's going to be some days where you realize, holy shit, I forgot the first fucking story. You know, you're gonna forget stuff. So what you need to do is you need to obviously memorize the stories, do what you want, and then you got to spend 2 or 3 or 4 days just revising over everything you have, because you don't want to forget anything that you learned. You don't even want to forget one single word that you have learned. You don't want to forget it. You want to remember every single story, because all of it is part of, because you miss one word and then you mess up the whole grammatical structure, you mess the whole sentence structure. You need to know every single little bit, right? That doesn't mean that you need to know exactly when every single word is used. You have to be easy on yourself in terms of the fact that you're not going to know a lot of stuff, but you should be able to memorize the story, and you can do that. So that's what I've been recommending. That's what I would recommend. As my latest observations, that's what I would recommend. I'm up to about story, I think 14 on Chinese, and only like story 7 on Spanish. So, which makes sense because the Chinese I can do a double as quick, but because I'm learning half as much because I'm only doing one part. But for the Spanish, yeah, I'm doing 2 parts, and it's good. It's getting in my brain. This is an interesting method, right? There's 60 stories in total. So in order for me to get through all 60 stories, if I focused on Chinese, I could get through that 60 stories within probably a few weeks, right? And if I actually memorize 60 stories, that would be incredible, because all of that, as long as I keep reading through it and revising it since then and make sure I'm remembering it, then that sinks to the brain. And then all I have to do from there is just start making conversations with people, okay? And using my subconscious grammatical structures that I've already memorized in context and conversation. And the slight little flaws that you will have are going to be corrected through the confrontations within the conversation, right? You're going to have enough basis understanding from then, I believe, hopefully, that it's going to work out there. I think if I really fully focused on Chinese, I could probably get it done within the year in terms of my conversational fluency, meaning that I'm not actually fluent in Mandarin, but it would mean that I have a pretty good understanding of how I would communicate and how and how to understand people. In Spanish, I have no fucking clue when it's going to really work. However, I can only assume that once I get through all 60 stories, I'm on number 7, so I've got a very long way to go, and I memorize them all, then that's going to put me in a fantastic position. And I could probably, I mean, if I really grind, I could probably do it in a year. So let me know what you guys think about that. That's all I have to say.